Hello and welcome to Dialogue. I'm Yang Ray. The uniquely uncivil American presidential campaign has produced one of the biggest civic gatherings in decades. For 90 minutes on Monday night, New York time, a polarized nation paused to watch the first head-to-head encounter between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. The total audience have been estimated to be as high as 100 million viewers, surpassing the 80 million who watched Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan in 1980, the record for a presidential debate, and ranks among television benchmarks like the finales of MASH and Cheers. So how much impact will this, the first of three debates between the main contenders, alter the final outcome of the election itself? Joining me here in the studio, I'm happy to welcome Jidin Rahman, Chief Foreign Affairs Commentator of the Financial Times, and Professor Xie Tao from Beijing Foreign Studies University. But first, let's look at this background report.
Within minutes of taking the podium, the former U.S. Secretary of State went on the offensive. Hillary Clinton attacked Donald Trump on giving tax breaks to rich Americans.
He really believes that the more you help wealthy people, the better off we'll be, and that everything will work out from there. I don't buy that.
Clinton helped to negotiate the Trans-Pacific Partnership trade agreement linking 12 nations across the Pacific, but not China. She now opposes it, but Trump sought to cast doubt on whether she would continue to do so.
Now you want to approve Trans-Pacific Partnership. You were totally in favor of it. Then you heard what I was saying, how bad it is, and you said, I can't win that debate. But you know that if you did win, you would approve that, and that will be almost as bad as NAFTA.
All along on the campaign trail, Trump has maintained he was against the Iraq War, but both Clinton and the debate's moderator tried to set the record straight.
Donald supported the invasion of Iraq.
Wrong.
That is absolutely
wrong.
Proved over and over again.
I was against the war in Iraq, just so you put it out.
The record shows otherwise.
The record does not show that.
Why is your judgment?
The record shows that I'm right.
That led into a debate on how to counter the terror group ISIL, both at home and abroad. Clinton has laid out a 9,000-word plan promising to go after ISIL's leader. Trump says his strategy to defeat ISIL is a secret.
Just go to her website. She tells you how to fight ISIS on her website. I don't think General Douglas MacArthur would like that too much.
The next segment, we're continuing the subject of...
Well, at least I have a plan to fight ISIS.
We still have many days to go before polling can show us who the American people felt was stronger in this debate. But we do know that many of them, as many as a third of Americans, are watching all of the presidential debates to decide who should be the next U.S. president. Jessica Stone, CCTV, Hempstead, New York.
Do you think the impact of the first televised debate between the two main contenders will change the outcome of the election to a large degree?
Well, I think it's too early to say that the outcome of the election, the presidential debate will influence the voter decision. One, even though you said like over 100 million people watched the debate, but you don't know how many of them actually will turn out to vote on election day. Second, I think it's too early to say whether they really will vote according to their impression of the two candidates today.
Do you think it's issue-driven instead of a temperament or transparency of the tax returns that will decide the attitude of the voters?
I think with the debate, it's very impressionistic. It's people, historically, it's been one moment, that gets replayed endlessly, and it's very difficult to predict what that moment would be. So that, and often it's appearance. So that in the first Kennedy-Nixon debate, it was the fact that Nixon hadn't shaved properly. Then with Reagan-Carter, it was just one moment where Reagan said, "There you go again," and that's the only thing anyone remembers. And the question about this debate is, have you got that gotcha moment that defines it? I think the Clinton camp will be hoping that maybe Trump's apparent admission that he doesn't pay income tax, that could be the moment. But strange things crop up on social media. People are suddenly saying Trump was sniffing a lot. Now, I didn't notice that during the debate, but suddenly everyone's talking about it. So it'll take a couple of days for it to settle down and for the lasting impression for people to sort of decide by consensus what that was.
But both of you have been very shy as to who is the winner.
I would say Donald Trump performed beyond my expectation of him. So if you were to ask me to rate him, I would say he, based on my expectation of the two, I would say Donald Trump scored a little bit better than Hillary Clinton.
That surprised me a little bit. What do you think?
I would say it was kind of two halves. I thought, and I speak as somebody who wants Clinton to win, to be honest, I was a little worried after the first half hour of the debate. I thought Trump made a strong start, and he has some very clear, simple themes. You know, I'm going to bring jobs back to America. I'm a businessman. America's in bad shape. I can fix it. Hillary Clinton, it was less clear what her central proposition was. However, as the debate wore on, I think that Trump began to get onto ground that was uncomfortable for him. Does he pay tax? Is he a racist? Is he abusive towards women? These are not things he wanted to be talking about, and the debate tended to focus on that. And I think Hillary Clinton grew in confidence, and Trump became less controlled in his answers, which was what Clinton was trying to get the impression across, that he's not a guy you can trust. So I think by the end, Hillary was a bit more confident.
I appreciate your analytical comment on some of the specifics that both candidates came up with. For example, the tax returns, gender issues, presidential look. By the way, do you think which one looks more presidential, or is that a very good issue? Because many advisors to Hillary Clinton said she should not look so presidential because that would be counterproductive. What do you think?
Oh, exactly. A lot of people talk about, Donald Trump really needs to appear presidential. I think towards the very end of the debate, Hillary Clinton said something like, we need to look presidential. And if you look at the qualities, I think today Donald Trump didn't do so bad. I think he also came across as somebody who's strong, somebody who does have some strong opinions about some issues. But you look at Hillary Clinton, especially towards the last part of the debate, it's about the foreign policy. That's her own turf. She knows the very area extremely well, probably better than anybody in the United States. So in that sense, I think she comes across as very presidential. And so somebody was joking, the last part of Hillary Clinton's speech, it was like she was giving a rehearsal of her inaugural speech.
Hillary Clinton did a lot of prep work during the weekend leading up to the first televised debate. Do you think that matters for her?
Sure, because I think that one of her central propositions is, I'm actually prepared to be president, and this guy may be an effective puncher and a debater, but actually he doesn't know the issues. And so it was important to her that that image was reinforced during the course of the debate, and I think it was. But I think you've got to remember that Hillary Clinton came into this debate in a very bad moment for her in this campaign. She had come out of the conventions in July 8 points ahead. The momentum had been moving against her. By the time the debate started, they were neck and neck in the polls, and the momentum was with Trump, and she'd had this very bad illness episode, terrible footage of her apparently collapsing and so on. So she needed this debate to be decisive far more than he did.
Yeah, many observers accused Donald Trump of being ill-prepared. Is that because of the alleged complacency as a result of the recent polls? For example, with national polling reflecting a surge of momentum for Donald Trump, the pressure is squared on Hillary Clinton to live up to her reputation as a talented debater at a time when millions of undecided voters will be glued to their screens.
No, I wouldn't say that Donald Trump was so complacent about this debate, because, look at the polls that you cited, that he was actually, getting very close to Hillary Clinton. Well, Donald Trump struck me as somebody who was speaking very spontaneously. I think that's a very important impression to many people who voted for Donald Trump in the primary. Hillary Clinton struck me as too much prepared, over-prepared. Well, towards the very end, like Mr. Rahman said just now, she actually, Donald Trump asked her a question, right? You prepared very well. Hillary Clinton said, yes, I prepared for presidency. That, I'm proud of that. But that kind of over-preparedness also can strike many people as she was not sincere. She was not spontaneous.
Exactly. One of the key issues that may make a sea difference between these two rival contenders in the race would be whether, or has been, Hillary Clinton has been a politician around for a long while. I mean, she comes across as a professional politician, and that will seriously alienate some of the supporters of Donald Trump.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that if you look at the opinion polls on whether Americans feel the country is going in the right direction, they don't. 70% think the country is going in the wrong direction. Now, Hillary Clinton is the continuity candidate. She worked in the Obama administration. Her husband was president. She is a professional politician. You can't deny it. Whereas Trump is very much a radical break. He's never been a politician. He's a businessman. And if Americans are looking for change rather than continuity, and everything suggests that they are, that's a huge advantage to Trump.
Excuse me, why for a disillusioned big audience in the United States, seniority and being a professional politician would be a curse rather than a blessing for a prospective president.
Look, I agree with you. I mean, I think that it's a serious job and you need somebody who actually knows what they're doing. But I think historically, they've tended to vote for the outsider candidates. So they voted for Reagan to beat Carter, who was the incumbent president. They voted for Obama, who was again a one-term senator, very inexperienced. Americans tend to vote for Bill Clinton over George H.W. Bush, the outsider, each time. And that mood for an outsider is even stronger now. I don't think it necessarily makes sense, but you've got to factor it in as something that's powerful in this election.
Do you think the rise of the internet actually takes the blame for judging Donald Trump not with traditional standards? Actually, supporters of Donald Trump were measuring him and judging him with unconventional and untraditional standards. Why?
For example, could you give me an example of the unconventional standards? When you say unconventional standards, what kind of the standards you are having?
It's my question as to why being unprofessional could come across as a blessing for the Republican presidential hopeful.
No, I think this has nothing to do with the internet age. I think, it's just like Mr. Rahman said, most Americans are very frustrated with the status quo in Washington, D.C. Most of them are angry, and they want to have change. Remember Barack Obama 2008? Yes, we can. And this time you can also, I think there's an analogy, very strong analogy, except this time they say, yes, we can, but we want to have somebody different, somebody who is not really closely related to Barack Obama. So Hillary Clinton would strike them as a continuity candidate, to borrow from Mr. Rahman.
Now, is that because of the issue of a family dynasty, family politics, or the alleged email server scandal? She's not trusted.
It's everything. She's been around for a very, very long time, and these accumulation of scandals, and people don't even really remember the details. I mean, who remembers the details of Whitewater or Vince Foster?
It has a lot to do with transparency.
Yeah,
and the projection of state
it's
secrets.
also, I think, just they sort of have heard so much about Hillary Clinton. They say in English, mud sticks. If you throw enough at it, people can't remember the details. They just got this general impression that the Clintons cover stuff up, that they're a bit corrupt, and so on. Now, frankly, I don't think there's much comparison. I think Donald Trump has a much more questionable stuff in his past. For example, Trump University is in front of the courts for alleged fraud, and you look at those stories, they're pretty bad. But I think that for whatever reason, Hillary's trust levels are actually lower than those of Donald Trump, and that is a problem for her. So she's going to have to run not on trust, but on competence, and that's what she's going for. But whether people want that kind of low-key competence, it depends really how much of a risk they think they're taking with Trump. She's got to convince people that, okay, he is change, but he's dangerous change. And that's why she said during the debate, do you want this guy near the nuclear button? A man who's so temperamental, so emotional. And I think that is potentially a powerful attack for her.
What do you think of the explosive impact of the gender issue? Because Hillary accused Donald Trump of calling one lady Miss Piggy. And that would cause anger from among the women, right?
Yes, I think that's why many women are turned off by Donald Trump. They know Donald Trump's records of saying these either racial or gender, connotated slurs, throwing them against women, racial minorities like rapists, Mexicans, etc. I think they know this. And so that's pretty much why Donald Trump has a very, very low support rating among, the lower class women and also among racial minorities. Look at African Americans. He get only perhaps like 5% support rate. Look at Hispanics, about 20%. I think that's the maximum for Donald Trump.
Thank you very much. You are watching Dialogue with Professor Xie Tao and Mr. Jiden Rahman, the commentator of Foreign Affairs of Financial Times. We're discussing the first televised debate between Hillary Clinton and her rival, Donald Trump. Stay with us, please. Welcome back. Jiden, you've been a commentator of foreign affairs issues for Financial Times. What do you think of their debates on foreign policy issues? For example, both Hillary and Donald pointed their fingers to Russia in their commentaries on, for example, the hacking.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that Trump's relationship with Russia is a really fascinating subplot of this whole campaign, because he does appear to have, firstly, a kind of mutual admiration club with Vladimir Putin, which is very unusual in American politics. You know, Russia's never been that popular, and Putin is, as most Americans would see it, you know, a kind of violent anti-American dictator. And yet Trump has said he's a strong leader, someone we should admire. Putin has said, yeah, Trump's a great guy. And then you come into the, so there's even been the supposition that maybe Trump is in some ways indirectly being aided by Putin. And that came particularly into focus at the time of the Democratic Convention, when you suddenly had embarrassing emails hacked from the Democratic Party's email server released. And it was so embarrassing, it forced the resignation of the chairwoman of the convention. And so this came up in the debate. And Hillary said, yeah, this was the Russians. And Trump said, oh, well, maybe it was the Russians. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was some 400-pound guy just sitting on the edge of his bed hacking into it. It was rather peculiar. And I was surprised, actually, that Clinton didn't go after him more on the Russia issue, because actually the opinion polls suggest that being too close to Putin is not an aid for Trump.
Xietao, do you think the image of Putin is always examined with an ideological lens? For example, he's got a strong KGB background, therefore he's accused of using hacking to influence the process of presidential elections in the United States. Do you take the issue of hacking very seriously?
Well, cybersecurity, of course, is very important. I would say perhaps one of the top 3 issues in the next decade or 2 decades. You look at U.S. and China, you look at United States, Russia, you look at EU and Russia. Cybersecurity has really become serious. So when Hillary Clinton raised up that issue, I think it's important. Now look at Russia. Did Russians really hack into American computers? That's very hard to prove. But look at Putin's personality, like back to your question about this ideologically lensed view. I think Americans do have that kind of view. They tend to look at communist leaders, former or current leaders, through that kind of anti-communist lens. And that's understandable, I would say, even though I wouldn't say this is acceptable, but I think it's understandable for Americans.
I think it's a bit more than that. I mean, I think that basically Putin's actions recently in Ukraine, the annexation of Crimea, and then the intervention in Syria, and most recently the bombing of Aleppo and all of that, have meant that he's not really seen, partly through the communist lens, as you suggest, but also as the most active adversary of American foreign policy. And so for somebody like Hillary, who's very kind of in a way in the mainstream of conventional American foreign policy, she would see him as a threat to American interests. Trump has sort of suggested that maybe America should seek a rapprochement with Russia. So behind the arguments about Putin as a personality, there is actually a substantive debate about, should America push back on Ukraine, or should America say, as Trump sometimes seemed to imply, and in fact his former campaign manager was very close to the previous Ukrainian regime, worked for them. Trump has suggested, well, maybe this is a long way away and America shouldn't care about it.
Let's take issue with predictability, or the other way around, with the 2 candidates, given the fact that Hillary Clinton was the First Lady, a Senator from New York, and the former Secretary of State, yet Donald Trump was only a billionaire. He didn't have the experiences for being a president. Therefore, many observers in China, for example, say Hillary is far more predictable in terms of shaping the prospective foreign policy of the White House. And in sharp contrast, Donald Trump is highly uncertain and unpredictable. Therefore, he comes across as a danger. Do you buy this idea?
Well, let me put it this way. Hillary Clinton has over 30 years of experience, like Donald Trump said, even though, quote from Donald Trump, bad experience in Washington, D.C. Now, so she's very predictable, but to many foreigners, including some Chinese policymakers and analysts, being predictable does not mean desirable. Many Chinese don't like her, and you know that. And so I think you have to really make a choice between having somebody who has a long record of making policy, somebody who's been in the spotlight for over 3 decades, but her policies are so well known that we don't really like her.
Dr. Xietao, I did do some homework. For example, I know something about the history concerning bilateral relationship between our 2 countries, the United States and the PRC. Richard Nixon had been known for being a die-hard anti-communist activist in the United States, yet he made the historic 1972 visit to China, opening the door between the two countries, laying groundwork for normalization of the official ties. Another example is Ronald Reagan, who was known for being anti-communist during the Cold War, yet he was said to be he conducted a very constructive bilateral relationship between his administration and Beijing, yet Bush the senior, who always put on a broad smile when he was meeting Chinese government officials, he sold over 250 F-15 fighters to Taiwan, to our biggest surprise. What do you make of the issue of predictability or unpredictability of professional politicians in this context?
Yang Rui, I certainly got your point, and I agree with your point. That is, candidates, when they are running for campaign, they often appear to be tougher than they actually are. And so when the campaign dust is settled down, and they actually tone down their policies, because governing America, making foreign policy decisions is quite different, right? I agree with you. So it's very possible that when Hillary Clinton is elected, she could tone down her rhetoric towards China or other countries, and she could actually be a much better president than some of the ones that we're familiar with.
And Gina, what do you make of the popular Chinese sentiment here about Donald Trump, who, as a business executive, might be very practical, down to the earth in shaping the bilateral relationship, which is currently rocked by the choppy waters in the South China Sea, as well as disputes surrounding Diaoyu Islands and the THAAD deployment in the DPRK.
I think I think it's naive, actually. I think I can understand why the Chinese are very suspicious of Hillary Clinton for all the reasons to do with the pivot, and she is associated with a policy of pushing back quite firmly against China in the South China Sea. So I can understand you'd want an alternative, but that involves really not listening to what Donald Trump is saying. The very first thing he said in this debate was to attack China and Mexico for allegedly taking away American jobs, to accuse China of manipulating the currency, and to suggest that he would impose tariffs on Chinese goods, which would be a direct hit at the Chinese economy, at the US-Chinese relationship. Now, you can say, oh, well, he doesn't mean it. Maybe he doesn't, but maybe he does. And that is a big risk for China. And it is also this unpredictability element. Hillary, I think, we know what her attitude is to China. It's not one that the Chinese feel entirely comfortable with, but it's something they've learnt to live with. Trump could come in and maybe he'd say, well, I don't care about the Diaoyu Islands, I don't care about the South China Sea, and the Chinese would love that. But what if he did mean stuff on tariffs? It would be a bit of a disaster.
And Donald Trump came under fire for his remarks about the nuclear arsenal. What do you think of the concerns of the White House?
Well, he made very strong objection to the Iranian nuclear deal, and he also had very harsh words towards DPRK. And I remember he said, remember, the single biggest threat to the United States of America is nuclear weapons. And he made that very, very clear. So I think if he gets elected, if he meant what he said today, and then that could be a big, big problem for China, because he said China should go into DPRK and take out the nuclear weapons. That's what he said. You understand him, that he thinks that climate change is not the biggest threat. He said that's a hoax from China.
Although he denied saying that in the debate today, but he did.
He said this today. Yeah.
And what about the traditional bonds between Washington and its NATO allies? For example, the commitments, responsibilities, and the issue of, for example, financial budget, the military budget. What do you think of the accusation by Hillary Clinton about his unpredictability in maintaining the traditional bonds with the allies?
Yeah, she tried to make a big point about that. Because Trump has said both in Asia and in Europe that the Allies aren't paying enough for their own defense, and their America might withdraw its defense guarantees if they didn't pay more. And I think Hillary Clinton is trying to say, no, you can't talk about allies in that way. And then again, underlying that, there's still a philosophical difference. Hillary Clinton believes that America should be very predictable, that it should do what it says, and that's what foreign policy is all about. Trump has actually said, no, I want to be unpredictable. I want people not to know what I'm doing, so that maybe they'll be a bit scared of me. It's a very different approach to foreign policy.
And what do you think of the effectiveness of such unpredictability on the donor side?
No, it can be very disastrous for U.S. allies, people who are listening to Donald Trump's speech. Remember, Hillary Clinton said, our word is good. I want to reassure our allies that we We want to keep our treaty obligations and others. These words can be very devastating, right? Back to Donald Trump, I think, before we end the show today, I think Trump strikes me as somebody like, he's really staying on the same message that he sent out during the primary campaign. For example, anti-immigrants, anti-foreign trade. Remember these words, key words that he keeps repeating again and again: politician, jobs, and these words, And so I think, he could strike people, who are not really as well educated as like sincere. People who is staying on the message, consistent. And that could make a big difference for people who are evaluating him vis-a-vis Hillary Clinton.
People would not probably win the debates, but they could lose them. Do you buy this idea?
Yeah, and as I said, we don't know, and we won't know for a few days until impressions settle down. And of course, there are 2 more debates to go. I think that the possibility of Trump doing something really crazy in the next couple of debates is always there, because he's not a professional politician and he has a very short fuse. He can lose his temper. So I think Hillary will be trying to debate him, but I think he's shown over the course of a year that he's capable of mounting an incredibly effective campaign against all the predictions of political pundits like me. So people like me would watch it and say, oh, well, clearly he can't say that, that's his campaign's over. And we were wrong time and again. And I think that may yet happen again.
Well, Julian is a supporter and a fan of Hillary Clinton, so he is biased somehow in giving his commentaries. But what will be the critical issues that will decide the attitude of the undecided voters, and particularly those swing states in the last moment?
Yang, actually, I don't know, but I think, for people like us, you and Mr. Rashman and others, I think there's a real danger for us as so-called elites to project our views and impressions to the real ordinary people who are going to vote on the election day. I think we have been wrong. I was wrong. And like Mr. Rahman said, he was wrong. Because, we probably underestimate the feelings, the frustration and anger among many, many ordinary Americans.
One posting went viral on Twitter, and it says, most of the supporters for Donald Trump are stupid, but don't underestimate the stupidity of those guys in large groups. What do you think of the joke?
Well, Trump himself has alluded to it. I mean, he said, we love the undereducated. He knows that he appeals to people who aren't the college-educated, elite kind of people, but he thinks correctly. In a democracy, they have one vote, everybody else has one vote. That's the way the system works.
Now, not only the 2 candidates are pretty old, but they are very unpopular in the US history of elections. Do you think it's the American democracy that will be the first casualty, given all the jokes? Very quickly.
I think if Hillary Clinton wins, no. I think if Trump wins, I think it will be a real blow to America's image.
And your take?
Yeah, I think, this whole debate and the election campaign does a lot of damage to American soft power, the so-called democracy.
Certainly there are many issues to reflect upon if you seriously review what's going on there in the United States. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.